and welcome back to Breaking Down the Deck here at Pay to One. And David, I have a gift for you.
Wow, stuff from me.
Radiation.
Wow.
Because today we are breaking down the Wise Mothman. And I'm a avid fan of the Wise Mothman. I have literature, I have shirts, I have playmats, and of course I've got the commander, the Wise Mothman. And
you have the deck book.
Yes, yeah. I also have the deck box.
Yeah, sure do.
And one great thing about the Wise Mothman is there is a lot of ways to build him. And I thought I would go over the way I chose to build him and a little bit of a background of why I chose it. Is one of my favorite things to do in Magic the Gathering is +1 counters. I'm a simple man. I see +1 counters and I press like.
Let me ask you a question.
Go for it.
This is from Fallout, right?
Yes.
So this is a Fallout pre-con set?
Exactly. So the Wise Mothman is originally from a precon, but I think I did the math and there's maybe 10 cards from the precon Salonia.
Yeah.
All of the cards have changed pretty much. There's not really a Fallout theme. Ways you can build Mothman are you can go mutants, you can go mill, and the way I built him is with +1 counters. He's in soul type colors. He costs 4 mana, blue, black, and green. And he's a 3/3 with flying. And when he enters the battlefield or attacks, each player will get a rad counter. The gift I gave you.
It's mine.
Exactly. If you don't know rad counters, they're quite confusing the first time you read them. But at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you would mill a card. And if it's a non-land card, the Wise Mothman's second ability says whenever one or more non-land cards are milled, a +1 counter is put on one of my creatures. And you lose radiation if it's a non-land card, and you take 1 damage. So really, it's a great way to just, throughout the whole turn, be putting +1 counters on each of your creatures. And yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting deep dive into Mothman, and we'll see you as soon as it's over. Okay, this is the deck tech, and let's go through the commander one more time, and then we'll go through the 99. So one more time, the Wise Mothman being soul tie colors. He's got flying, and when he enters the battlefield or attacks, each player gets a rad counter. Whenever one or more non-land cards are milled, put a +1 counter on each of up to X target creatures, where X is the number of non-land cards milled this way. Worth noting that if 2 cards are milled and they're both non-land, you can only put 1 +1 counter on a target creature. But if you have 2 creatures on the battlefield, you can put a +1 counter on each of them. So yeah, it's in the text. It's a bit hard to understand. This is a radiation here. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, if you have any rad counters, mold that many cards for each non-land card milled this way. So let's jump straight into it. As I mentioned, I have built this deck with +1 counters in mind. So I'm going to have more of a hand here. We've got our +1 counters enablers, should I say. Hardened Scales, a classic. It just allows me to get an additional +1 counter for each +1 counter I produce. We've got Branching Evolution. Also was in the precon. This doubles it as opposed to an additional. So if I were to put 4 +1 counters, I would get instead 8. We have the Ocelot, which is also an artifact. If one or more +1 counters would be put on an artifact or creature, that many +1. What's really nice is this artifact itself is able to put a +1 counter on a creature I control. So if Mothman can't come out, so if he costs too much because of command attacks, I can still operate my deck's game plan with this simple artifact here. We have the Winding Constrictor, one of my all-time favorite snakes in the Magic universe. I used to play Standard a lot with this card. So happy that I got a new art in the Fallout universe. But this snake does pretty much what Hardened Scales does. If one or more counters would be put on an artifact or creature you control, that many +1. But also counters that it says if you were to get 1 or more counters, you would get that +1. So if Mothman is out, I actually get 2 rad while everyone else gets 1, which can be good if you're in the reanimation strategy. Now I do have ways to reanimate in this deck, not too many, but good to know. Hedonist Climb, also a very favorite card of mine. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1 counter on target creature. Then if that creature has 3 or more +1 counters on it, transform Hedonist Climb. And the backside, and I'm so sorry for the camera here, you probably won't be able to see this, but it transforms into Wind Temple of Orazka. Yes, and it's a land, legendary land, but for 1 blue and 1 green and 1 colorless, I can give target creature +X/+X and flying until end of turn, where X is its power. So it just turns into a land that can sort of get in the last few damages in the sky. Very nice. A new card I've added to this deck is Scythe Cat Cub from the Foundations Jumpstart deck. It's a 2/2 cat with trample. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, put a +1 on target creature you control. If this is the second time this has resolved, this ability, double the amount of +1 counters on that creature instead. So really great. I'm running 3 fetch lands, maybe more ramp spells. There may be a time where the Scythe Cub actually makes an impact on the board, turning Mothman from like an 8/8 to what that'll be, yeah, a 13/13. Like, we'll just double his +1 counters pretty quickly. We've got another classic here, Pierre. I do not have Toothy in this deck because Toothy is blue. Oh wait, I've run blue, but I don't have Toothy. But if 1 or more counters would be put in on the permanents of your team, like your creature you control, put that many counters +1. Innkeeper's Talents. At the beginning of combat on your turn, I may put a +1 counter on target creature. So another thing like Hedonist Climb, where at the beginning of combat on my turn I can put a +1. I can get it to level 2 to give my creatures with counters ward 1. And then for 4, if I would, it turns into basically doubling season. If I would put a counter on, it doubles. But also, I believe stuff like Infect will double. I have a instant kill combo in this deck. I have Innkeeper's Talents, and we'll come to the other one in a moment. But that's Frasca, which Frasca will enter with double the Planeswalker loyalty, and her ultimate allows me to put 9 infects on someone. But because of Innkeeper's final level, it would actually be 18 infects and they would instantly die. So yeah, there are some ways to just kill someone from nowhere, especially with this card. And of course I have to have some Lord of the Rings cards. I have Andoril Narsil Reforged. It's an artifact and it has Ascend. And whenever a equipped creature attacks, I put a +1 counter on each creature I control. But if I have the City's Blessing, I put 2 +1 counters on each creature I control instead. Just another way to pump up those +1 counters and get them running. Another classic is the Ozolith. If my creatures with +1 counters would die, they would move to the Ozolith. And then at beginning of my combats on my turn, I may move the counters from the Ozolith onto a creature. So just some +1 counter shenanigans again. And then because the Mothman cares about cards being mulled, and for each non-land card mulled this way, Mind Crank has made it to the deck. If an opponent would lose life, that player mulls that many cards, which will just trigger Mothman a bunch of times. This card is really dangerous in EDH and Commander. Insane. Bristly Bull Spine Sower. Landfall. When a land enters the battlefield, I put a +1 counter on target creature. But for 5 mana, I can double the amount of +1 counters on each creature I control. Another way to just start closing up the game. Bristly Bull, really good if you have nothing in your hand. Just use this ability a bunch of times. Corpse Jack Menace, which is from the precon as well. If 1 or more +1 counters would be put on a creature I control, twice that many +1 counters would be put instead. And then Evolution Sage. I just want to check something. Yes, okay, so we're getting onto the next part of my deck, which I think is just value time. And also working with the radiation counters that goes onto every player. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under my control, I proliferate. So I can once again get another some more +1 counters on each creature I control, or I can double the amount of radiation, give an additional radiation to everyone. Rad Storm, it's a 4 mana cost instance, and it has Storm. And all it does is it proliferates. This I've seen trigger 8 times on Storm, which means I can proliferate 8 times for simple 4 mana. Very good card. And the fact that it's instance, really, it's like an amazing combat trick. I love that card. Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Now this is sort of like really good with Mothman because you are milling yourself a lot. If you don't know Agatha's Soul Cauldron, I'll give a quick rundown on it. It reads, you may spend mana as though it were any mana of any color to activate abilities of creatures I control. Creatures you control with +1 counters on them have all activated abilities of all creatures exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. And her last ability, it's like artifacts. Its last ability is exile target card from a graveyard. When a creature card is exiled this way, put a +1 counter on target creature. So I have things like Walking Ballista in this deck, which will turn all of my creatures into Walking Ballistas. It can get really, really disgusting. Agatha's Soul Cauldron, another way to just sort of close out the game. Best target is definitely Walking Ballista, but there are other good ones. Of course, we have Reanimate. Reanimate is just a really good way if I have mulled something by accident that I really need. This can just get it back from my graveyard. Or if an opponent has something really nice, say for instance a Nezahul, I will just reanimate that in a heartbeat. Evolution Witness, a really good way to get stuff out of the graveyard. Each time a +1 counter is put on Evolution Witness, I can return a permanent card from our graveyard to my hand. So in a typical commander game, Mothman may trigger 4 times. With Evolution Witness out, I can potentially get 4 permanents from my graveyard to my hand on each turn cycle. And itself, if Mothman is not out, I have Adapt, which means I can do it just by having this card out. Ferrigul, one of the ways I close out the game. A bit of a tricky one, I'm still working on this one. But whenever a creature you control dies, put a +1 counter on Ferrigul, which grows quite exponentially with Hardened Scales, Branching Evolution. But when Ferrigul dies, each opponent gets the number of rad counters equal to Ferrigul's power. Which means if Ferrigul's at 2020, everyone is going to get 20 rad counters. So even if you die, their rad counters don't go away. You can still punch back from the grave. I love this card. Ramming up Excavator. I may play land cards from my graveyard. For obvious reasons, I'll probably be milling some lands, and it's always important to hit your land drops. Slogurk, the Overslime. It's a 3/3 with Trample. Whenever a land card is put into your graveyard from anywhere, put a +1 counter on Slogurk. I can remove 3 +1 counters from Slogurk and return it to my hand. Whenever Slogurk leaves the battlefield, return up to 3 target lands from your graveyard to your hand. So just a way to also, make use of lands in the graveyard. I really hate missing land drops, so these cards are in here for a reason. One of my game enders again, Giggling Skitterspike. It's a 1/1 with Indestructible and a cost 4. But whenever Giggling Skitterspike attacks, blocks, or becomes the target of a spell, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. So a great target for Mothman to pump up. It could be like a 20/20. I could attack with that, deal 20 damage to everyone. Really good card. Really happy I pulled this card. Inexorable Tide. It's an enchantment, and whenever I cast a spell, I proliferate. Great for rad counters, great for +1 counters. A really solid enchantments to have on the battlefield. Hannaback Walker. Hannaback Walker costs X and X. Whenever it enters with X +1 counters on it. So if you spend 2 to cast Hannaback Walker, it enters with 1 +1 counter. Whenever Hannaback Walker dies, I create a 1/1 colorless Thopter Artifacts creature token with flying for each +1 counter on Hannaback Walker. And then for 1 mana and I tap Hannaback Walker, I can put a +1 counter on it. So just another value creature for the Mothman, and for all of my enchantments that sort of increase the amount of +1 counters. If Hannibrak Walker were to die to, like, say, a board wipe, I would get potentially 8, 12, maybe even 30 1/1 Thopters. I used to play this card in standard when I was playing +1 counters. People underestimate it. Champion of Lammelts. Now, anyone who has died to Champion of Lammelts is probably shivering right now. But it's a 1/1 and it costs 3. But creatures with power less than Champion of Lamholt's power can't block creatures you control. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1 counter on Champion of Lamholtz. So, those are nice blockers you have, but they can't block my creatures and you will die. So, another way just to evasion in a way. I'll sneak in that damage. Who needs trample? Okay, some more value creatures I have here. Is Dreamtide Whale. Please, everyone, run Dreamtide Whale. It's so good. It costs 3 mana and it's a 7/5 with Vanishing 2. Whenever a player casts a second spell, each turn proliferates. Worth noting, you can proliferate the Vanishing counters. So, it has 2 Vanishing counters. In a turn cycle, there is a chance that a player will cast more than 2 spells or more than 1 spell. Just pump up that Vanishing counter. It's a 3 mana 7/5. That by itself is ridiculous. But with +1 counter decks and radiation in the play, it gets nuts. You can plus the radiation players. You can plus the counters on your creatures. One of my strongest cards in the deck. And then, of course, I think this is the last value creature, sort of, is Muldrotha the Gravetide. Once turn each of its turns, you may play up to 1 permanent card from your graveyard. So I can play a land, an artifact, a creature, enchantment. Maybe a planeswalker. I have 1 in this deck. Great card, just value. Everyone loves Muldrotha. No one cries when they see him. Okay. So sort of protection. I have Plex Caster Frogling. It's a 0/0 that costs 3. Oh, that sounds terrible. But no, it has Graft 3. When it enters, it comes with 3 +1 counters. And then for 2 mana, I can target creature with a +1 counter gains Shroud until end of turn. It's just okay, cool. If you try remove any of my creatures for 2 mana, I can offer them protection, give them Shroud. Just really, really sneaky frog. Basilisk Carla, which is sort of a new addition. I realized I had no way to gain life and I was losing a lot of life, so I just added a sneaky Basilisk Carla. In future, I am wanting to replace Basilisk Carla for Shadow Spear because I would love to give Mothman or anything trample. I don't really care too much about the Death Touch. I just want the lifelink, and Shadow Spear gives lifelink and trample. So anyone out there who wants to give me a free Shadow Spear, I'm looking for one. Heroic Intervention. Permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible. There's so many board wipes, especially in my pod. So Heroic Intervention is a necessity. Always keep 2 mana up. Protect your board. Protect the Mothman at all costs, please. He doesn't deserve a death like I guess Day of Judgments or whatever it is you use. Mutational Advantage. Costs 3. And it says permanents you control with counters on them gain hexproof and indestructible. Prevents all damage that would be dealt to those permanents this turn and then proliferates. So another protection, but also for 1 extra mana I can proliferate my creatures. Now this is technically a land, but if I'm being mana flooded or land just drawn lands, this is a really good protection spell as well. Yeah, on the back side is a green-black land that enters tapped. But on the front side, it's a I can put a +1 counter on a creature I control and against indestructible until end of turn. Really good card. Ripples of Potential. It's cost 2 and has an instance. And it reads, proliferate. Then choose any number of permanents you control that had a counter put on them this way. Those permanents phase out. Another board wipe protection, especially if your creatures have +1 counters on them. You can add +1 counters and just, let's say, they're not here for until my next upkeep. Okay, so now we're getting onto sort of my interaction. The first one being a card from the precon. It's Rampaging Yaug Y. It costs 3 and X, and it's a 2/2 with Vigilance and Trample. but Rampaging Yaguai enters the battlefield with X+1 counters on it. When, I'm not going to say its name again. When Rampaging enters the battlefield, destroy any number of artifacts and or enchantments with total mana value X or less. Really good card. Get rid of the Heuristic Study. Get rid of any stacks pieces. This card, I just really liked it in the precon. May be subject to change in the future though. Scavenging Ooze, really good graveyard hates. For 1 green, I can exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a creature card, I put a +1 count on Scavenging Ooze, and you gain 1 life. So if you're a graveyard synergy and Mothman is helping you out, I'll try and make it not that way with Scavenging Ooze. Walking Ballista, which I mentioned earlier. I've put it as interaction because it can come on the board as a 1/1, but in the turn cycle, it can come up as a 10/10. But let's read what Walking Ballista does. It costs X and X. When it enters with X+1 counters, much like Hannah Backwalker. But for 4 mana, not needing to tap Walking Ballista, I can put a +1 counter on it. And then I can, at any time, remove a +1 counter and deal 1 damage to target creature or player. Now, this card is disgusting with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, but it's also just disgusting by itself. If I have spare mana, which I have plenty of in this deck, I can sort of like just spot remove any creature that's causing problems. Can even do it as a politic tool. I'll ask players, I will not remove your stuff with Walking Ballista, but don't touch my stuff. So Walking Ballista, he's just there in case. You never know. Of course, we need some board wipes. I have Toxic Deluge as a cost 3 mana, and as an additional cost, I may pay X life. All creatures get -X until end of turn. One of my favorites interactions is Abrupt Decay because they cannot be countered by spells or abilities, including Ward, which is very common now in Commander. But I can destroy target non-land permanent with converted mana 3 or less. So gets past Ward, it gets past just counter spells, and it only costs 2 mana and it's instant. New card from the Fallout precon, Nuclear Fallout. It costs 2 black and X, and each creature gets twice -X until end of turn, but then each player gets X rad counters. Just really nice, really nasty. Also love the art. Okay, some more interaction. I can return each, Wave Goodbye, costs 4 mana, and it reads, return each creature without a +1 counter on it to its owner's hand. Just in a way a board clear, but that's not too devastating for the board, for your opponents. But I would play this if I'm about to win the game. Just clear the board and go in for attacks. Atomize, it costs 4 mana, quite expensive, but destroy target non-land permanents and then proliferates, which I have found to be really worth the extra mana to do that. Proliferate, once again, rad counters, +1 counters. Very good. A card from Modern Horizons 3 is Collective Resistance. Costs 2 mana, but you can escalate, which means you can add 1 green mana. And for each time you escalate the spell, you can destroy an artifact, an enchantment, or target creature you control gains hexproof and indestructible. So for a total of 5 mana, you can destroy an artifact, an enchantment, and protect your board. Oh, a creature on your board. The classic counterspell. Can't not have that card in my decks. I love it. Foul the Profane, which is also a land on the backside. But if I don't need the land, I can also say destroy target creature or planeswalker at instant speed. Repulsive Mutation. Repulsive Mutation costs a green and a blue and X. I can put X +1 counters on target creature I control. Then target creature then counter up to 1 target spell unless its controller pays mana value equal to the greatest power among creatures I control. So I can just pay 2 and choose Mothman, who may be a 10/10 at the time, and ask my opponents to please pay 10 or their spell gets countered. Sink into Stupor. This is also a land on the backside, but for 3 mana I can return target spell or non-land permanent to my opponent's hand. Also really good if I don't need a land. I may be running too many MDFCs in this deck, but I really like them. They're very useful. And then the last MDFC, if I remember correctly, is Boggart's Trawler. Boggart Trawler is nice because it's a creature card, but it's also a Bazooka Bog when it enters the battlefield. It's just nice to have a body to start pumping up with Mothman. So instead of Bazooka Bog, I'm running Boggart's Trawler. Okay, another interaction, which is a land, is Boseiju Who Endures. It's a legendary land that taps for green, but for 2 mana I can discard it and destroy target artifacts, enchantments, or non-basic land and opponent controls. Just really good options, and it's uncounterable because it's a channel ability. Assassin's Trophy. I can destroy target permanents and opponent controls. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield. I think the funniest thing I've targeted with Assassin's Trophy is a Soul Ring for Andres. Yep, I mean, that's just comedy. Okay, some ramp. We got Arcane Signets, Talisman of Resilience, Talisman of Dominance, and Talisman of Curiosity. Soul Ring, and then those are artifacts you may all be familiar with. Farseek, which you may be familiar with, it's sort of like gets me a land, cultivate, more land. But this one is quite, might be one you might not be familiar with. Basking Brood Scale. It's a 2 mana cost 2/2 with the Void, so this card has no color. And for 2 mana I can adapt 1, which means I can put a +1 counter on this creature if it does not have a +1 counter. But whenever 1 or more +1 counters are put on Basking Brood Scale, it creates a 0/1 colorless spawn creature with a drowsy spawn creature with a sacrifice this creature, add a colorless mana to your mana pool. So yeah, good target for Mothman. I can start ramping very early with this card out. Also generate some blockers if you ever need them. Okay, Birds of Paradise. 1 mana cost a 0/1 flying, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Big fan of this card. And then one you may not be familiar with is Crystalline Crawler. It's a 4 mana 1/1. When it enters the battlefield with a +1 counter on it for each color of mana spent to cast it. So in this deck, possibly a maximum of 3 colors were spent to cast that, so it'll come with 3 +1 counters. I can remove a +1 counter from Crystalline Crawler and add 1 mana of any color to cast it. And I can also just tap it to put a +1 counter on it. Very good ramp spell. Incubation Druid. It's a 0/2. I can add 1 mana of any type that a land I control could produce. But if Incubation Druid has a +1 counter on it, I can add 3 mana of that type instead. And it has adapt 3. And then I have some card draw effects here. Give me 1 second here, everyone. This is starting to look a bit messy. So, first card draw is Inspiring Call. It's a 3 mana instance. Draw a card for each creature you control with a +1 counter on it. Those creatures gain indestructible until end of turn. This card doubles up as protection and card draw. I'm a big fan of multifunctional cards like that. Now this one isn't really card draw, but it can get you out of a pinch if needed. It's Planar Genesis. It's a green and a blue, and it's instant. I can look at the top 4 cards of my library. I can put a land card from a Mondem onto the battlefield tapped, but if I don't, put a card from a Mondem into my hand. So it's sort of like Growth Spiral with options. If you don't need the land, you can look at the top 4 cards of your library and just choose a card and put it in your hand. Arguably a much better Planar Genesis. Fada Mage. It's a 4 mana cost 1/1. It has Evolve. So Evolve is whenever a creature enters the battlefield. If it has greater power than Fada Mage, I put a +1 counter on Fada Mage. But whenever a +1 counter is put on Fada Mage, I may draw a card. I've nearly drawn my whole deck with this card alone. It's super strong. Okay, another MDFC is Disciple of Freyalis. It costs 6 mana, but when it enters, I may sacrifice a creature I control. If I do, I gain X life and draw X cards, where X is that creature's power. In a pinch, I can sacrifice something really big, gain some life, and draw that many cards. Very good. Tireless Tracker. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, I investigate. So I would make a clue token. Whenever you sacrifice a clue, put a +1 counter on Tyler's tracker. Multifunctional card draw +1 counters. Big fan. Okay, I'm gonna ask that you please put this card on the screen because this is in Phyrexian and I can't read Phyrexian. But I do know its zero ability is I draw a card and I proliferate. And I know that its -9 says if an opponent has less, basically I put 9 poison counters on an opponent, a target opponent, which is really good with the card I mentioned earlier that would allow me to put then 18 poison counters on one player. A big message to Wizards, please stop printing Phyrexian. It makes my brain hurts. Thank you. Okay, another card draw, the Great Hinge. This spell costs X less, where X is the greatest power among creatures I control. So, in the best case scenario, it costs 2 green mana. And it's a mana rock. I can add 2 green mana and gain 2 life. But also, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield, I put a +1 counter on it and I draw a card. This may be the best card on my deck. It's so good. It does everything. It ramps, it gains me life, it puts a +1 counter on my creatures, and it draws me a card. It does 4 functions for the low cost of 2 mana on the best case scenario. Danny Pink. Danny Pink costs 4, it has Mentor, so when this creature attacks, I put a +1 counter on target attacking creature with lesser power. But creatures you control have whenever 1 or more counters are put on this creature for the first time each turn, I draw a card. So, with Mothman out, in its whole turn cycle, I can potentially draw 4 to 8 cards. Like, if I put it on 2, because each creature will have this ability. So, super good card. And if I'm not mistaken, that is the majority of my deck. And I'll just quickly show you my lands. This will be fast. But we have 2 basic swamps, 3 basic islands, and 4 basic forests. And we have Botanical Sanctum, Zagoth's Triumph, Woodland Cemetery, Watery Graves, Verdicent's Bog, Verdant Catacombs, very good for landfall, Undercity Sewers, a good fetch target to surveil, Tainted Isle, Rejuvenating Springs, Polluted Delta, Overgrown Tomb, Overflowing Basin, Opulence Palace, Nurturing Peatland, Morphric Pool, Misty Rainforest, Mariposa Military Base, which is also card draw because for 5 mana I can tap this and draw a card. This ability costs 1 less for each radiation I have. Exotic Orchid, Drowned Catacomb, Dark Water Catacombs, Command Tower, and then Breeding Pool. And yeah, so that was my deck tech on the Mothman and his +1 counter shenanigans. I hope you enjoyed that. Please let me know if there's anything you would have done better, because I'm always looking for ideas for Mothman. And this deck is always changing. If you go to my Mox field, which should be linked in the description, you will see how much times Mothman has changed in the span of 1 year. Go have a look, it's very interesting. I found things that work, things that don't work, and I will definitely keep evolving the Wise Mothman.
Wow, that was a really wild deck, just with all the rations going on. You're like killing people with mill, losing life, and you're boosting your own creatures. So that's a really cool play. And Mothman, it's a cool creature. It's always fun to see like Universes Beyond in Magic, and Fallout is like such a strong IP, it's such a strong franchise. So it's good to see Fallout in Magic. And as Rowan said, you can build this in different ways. You can build all kind of different Fallout decks. And I think this is it's a bit of a sleeper deck, because when you see it, it's like a 3/3, it's flying, you can get some counters, but it really just kicks off really quick.
Yeah, it snowballs. I've had Mothman up to like 2020. The tourneys come out. It's if you have all of the right enchantments, all of the right synergies, it can get really disgusting and very, very hard to deal with. So yeah, hopefully you liked seeing the Wise Mothman. I would like to hear how you have built him, or how you would like to build him. I really recommend it. There's a lot of people voting him. I understand that it's a very popular commander, but I'm all for it. I want to see more Mothman in my pods, in my communities. There isn't enough of him, if I must be honest. Well, great. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode, be it a deck tech or maybe a gameplay video.
Cheers. Enjoy!